What happened during the period between the Testaments, between the Old Testament and the New? Welcome to Bible on the Go with Dr. Dan. The 400 years after Malachi wrote his last words until Matthew wrote his first words is often referred to as the period of biblical silence. The formal name is the intertestamental period. But this period of biblical silence was anything but silent. The world was turned upside down. That's what we're going to be talking about today. What exactly happened from Malachi to Matthew? Well, for one, a general, a warrior from Greece known as Alexander the Great, began to conquer the world, territory by territory, as he moved and as he conquered city-states and countries. He spread Greek culture. This was known as Hellenism, and the Hellenistic era was from 334 to 63 BC, the majority of the time in between Malachi and Matthew. Hellenism was a cosmopolitanism. It was a blending of elements from many cultures, and it was certainly viewed as modern. Alexander is the one responsible for helping to spread this culture. One of the things that was spread along with this culture was the Greek language. It was the language of the day, and it was the language that was enforced upon all the conquered cultures. So in a place like Palestine that was conquered by Alexander, they might have had a lot of Jews there speaking Hebrew, but they were forced to speak Greek in order to have commerce and in order to have business. And so the Hellenistic era from 334 to 63 took place in between the time period that Malachi was written to the time that Matthew was written. Well, when Alexander the Great died, his kingdom was so large that it was split between his three generals. Ptolemy, that begins with a P, P-T-O-L-E-M-Y, Ptolemy was the general that basically was given that took the part of the East and Egypt, the first part of the Fertile Crescent. Seleucus went north of Palestine and then east to Mesopotamia. So Syria and Mesopotamia, of course Mesopotamia being the land between the two rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates. So the Ptolemies had Egypt, one end of the Fertile Crescent. The Seleucids had the other end, the northern and eastern end of Mesopotamia. And Antigonus, the third general, had Asia Minor, which was north of all of that. So who was ruling in Palestine? Well, from 301 to 200, it was the Ptolemaic era, predominantly the Ptolemies. Then from 200 to 167 in Palestine, it was the Seleucids that had more control. Sometimes they were in favor of the Jews, other times they weren't. One in particular was this Seleucid ruler, Antiochus IV Epiphanes. He hated the Jews, and he outlawed Judaism. He outlawed worship in the temple, circumcision, anything having to do with the Jewish culture. He outlawed it, and it infuriated the Jews in Palestine. This trauma and war that they experienced caused a local family, the Mattathias brothers, to revolt. And they were given the name the Maccabees because Maccabee means hammer. They overthrew the Seleucid ruler, and they established their own dynasty, what was subsequently referred to as the Hasmonean Dynasty, and literally ruled in Palestine for 100 years, from 167 to 63. Now, one of the things that's true when you look at this history, especially after the Maccabean revolt, it was a religious revolt in the early days, but then the Hasmoneans began to exert their own power and create their own hierarchy and get involved in international politics to such a degree that you began to see different groups of Jews begin to emerge. The Pharisees, who wanted an emphasis on the law. The Sadducees, who were trying to have a political and legal claim to the land and to basically compromise with the local rulers. And then the Essenes, who moved down south by the Dead Sea and were basically trying to be the purest, holiest Jews they could be, and the Zealots. The Zealots, of course, were in that that Maccabee kind of culture of looking forward to a day when they could overthrow again and establish a Jewish dynasty. Well, all of this came to a head in 63 BC when Rome invaded with the Roman general Pompey and conquered Palestine and Egypt. You see, all of this that happened, the spread of the Hellenistic Empire, the spread of Greek culture, the spread of the Western idea, these Western ideas of learning and education and politics and governance, all of it was a major cultural shift. In the book of Galatians, Paul mentions this phrase, the fullness of time. Galatians 4:4 says, "But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons." You see, God knew what he was doing from Malachi to Matthew. The world was turned upside down. The culture of Greece and the organization of Rome. The Romans built roads and venues and built up cities and made it so that you could travel more easily by ship and along the roadways. The Romans were ruthless, but they established Roman law and order. And so travel from one city to the next became very easy. The fullness of time. One unified common language, Greek. One very efficient Roman road system in the land that was the crossroads of the Fertile Crescent between Egypt and Mesopotamia, just like in the Old Testament. And Jesus came in the fullness of time. It was easy for Jesus to move around in Palestine, to travel from Jerusalem to Nazareth, and Nazareth, the Galilee region, back to Jerusalem. And then after the resurrection and the ascension of Jesus, the disciples were dispersed, and Paul was able to travel within that Roman road system to the churches of Asia Minor and across the Mediterranean and spread the gospel even to Rome. You see, Jesus came at just the right time. God paved the way, and in the fullness of time he came to be the Savior for whosoever will, for all of us, so that we might receive the adoption as sons. Thanks for watching Bible on the Go with Dr. Dan. hit that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell to be reminded of new content.